Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tablas Creek Instagram live broadcast. I am Jason Haas, as always. I have a guest who I am incredibly excited about for today. He's one of my own inspirations. He's an icon in the California winemaking community. He has done more than I think anyone else to really bring organic and biodynamic and regenerative viticulture to the world of wine in California. I'm, of course, talking about Paul Dolan. So I'm going to invite Paul to join in just a couple minutes, but as I usually do while we're waiting for people to sign on, I am going to share a little bit about what's going on at the vineyard. The big news over the last month or so is that we have finished harvest. That's earlier than what we would normally see. So we're now at the point of getting the vineyard ready for winter. We're planting cover crop. You can see here some of the cover crop furrows that we have. We have reintegrated the sheep back into the vineyard, so our flock is out there snacking on any second crop clusters and raisins that they might find. They are also seeding the soil with microorganisms from their guts, so their manure. So as it rains, and we got a little bit of rain last night, we have more coming next week, that's going to jumpstart the soil's microbial activity. We are harvesting olives. That's one of the things we're doing today. Our olive trees are, they're just about ready. You can see in another picture that it's still more green than black. We would normally prefer to wait another couple of weeks, but we have a hard freeze coming tonight. So we got to get the olives off, because if they freeze, they'll rot. So that's today's project. We are doing a lot of work with compost. I love this picture of the compost pile steaming away in the morning sun. We're spreading compost out in the vineyard, just getting everything ready for the winter rainy season. It is really pretty out here. I'll share a couple of pictures. I'm going to be writing a blog with essentially some of the beauty that you can see out here right now. So these kind of autumn colors. So there's one of my favorite pictures from yesterday. Get you one more pretty one of looking up. Oops, I wanted a vertical one. Looking up through the vine rows at the. Oh well, never mind. I keep getting the same one. Up through the vine rows at the pretty harvest colors. So anyway, that's what's going on here. Everything is pressed off. The cellar is getting put to bed for winter, and we're getting ready for the same thing. Okay, so I'm going to invite Paul to join, and there we go. And then I can't wait for those of you who don't know him, I can't wait for you to meet him. And I'm really looking forward to talk. Hey, Paul.
Hey, buddy.
How are you?
Great.
So I gave a brief introduction to you when I started. I'm not sure if you heard it, but
I did. I didn't realize there was another button to push, so but I heard.
So I'm not sure if people know your full history. Obviously, going back to your time at Fetzer, what you're doing, what you did with the California Wine Institute and the California Sustainable Wine Growers Alliance, the impact you are having now with what you do at Truett Hurst and on the board of the Regenerative Organic Alliance. But I really do believe that you've had a greater impact on the adoption of organic farming and biodynamic and regenerative farming in the world of California wine than any other person. But I want to start even further back than that. So how did you find your way into wine? Was wine something that was like on your family table as you were growing up, or was it something that you came to later? And if so, how?
Well, it was definitely on the family table. When we, let me see, my grandfather was second generation, and he would be at our table at home fairly often. He would come over at least once a week. And it was hard not to have a conversation at the table without talking about wine, because that's who he was. That's what he did. He was actually surprisingly so, or amazingly so, or great for me, was that he was the first chairman of the board of the California Wine Institute, but it was at that time it was called the California Advisory Board. So it was sort of a promotional group coming out of 1934, the end of Prohibition. He took on that role while he was actually running the Italian Swiss Colony Winery.
Huh.
And so, and his son, my uncle, was a winemaker, third generation winemaker. And so we had lots of conversations, most of them during the summertime when we were up in Sonoma County, because I was born and raised in Oakland. And so lots of discussions about the possibility of maybe starting a winery, and which never happened. But fortunately, my sons and I decided that it was time to continue the legacy of the family. And it's a big family on my mom's side. It's quite large, but we were the only ones that decided to jump in.
Okay, so when you decided that wine was something that you wanted to do, what was your first step into the wine business?
Well, my very first step was I was at Santa Clara University as a senior, and I was doing my senior paper in finance, and I wrote it on the wine industry, and that was sort of my first kind of interest, possibly. But then I went into the military from there. Just the day I graduated, I drove back to Fort Benning, Georgia, and started my service. But all through that period of time, I knew that I was just going to do my 3 years as a lieutenant in the infantry, and when I got out, I was going to study winemaking. And the infantry was good enough; they let me actually go to classes while I was serving. So that was cool. Yeah.
And so was this back in California, or did you actually find wine classes in Georgia?
Well, there weren't wine classes. Let me see. It was I had transferred to Tacoma, Washington, Fort Lewis in Tacoma, Washington, and I went to I think I forget the name of the school that I went to, but I took a couple chemistry courses there.
Cool. Okay, and so at what point did your focus become on the impact of farming, and specifically on the impact of organic farming on the production of wine?
Well, for the first probably 10 years or so of my career, maybe 7 or 8 years of my career, I was just really focused on the art of winemaking. I was really just passionate about this idea that you could take grapes and you could artistically create something unique. And I was really focused on varietal expression. Back in the late 70s and early 80s, that was it. That's what we did. There weren't very many wineries. There was only a couple hundred wineries when I started in California. Now, of course, we know there's 4,500. And my energy and my focus was to utilize the skills and the creativity that I had in the business. So it wasn't until 1985 when the Fetzer family decided to build and create a food and wine center.
Oh, okay.
It was at the result of the arrival of a fellow named Michael Maltus onto our property in Hopland, which we called the Food and Wine Center, or the Valley Oaks Food and Wine Center, where we started growing 1,000 different varieties of fruits, vegetables, herbs, and edible flowers. And Michael did that using bio-intensive organic farming. And he was he was the Organic Gardener of the Year in 1985 for the Organic Gardening magazine. And so it was his inspiration, and quite frankly, it was the flavors of this amazing fruit. I just remember that these watermelons. When watermelon season, there was 45 different varieties of watermelon, and 18 varieties of basil, or basil as he would say. And it was so inspiring, and I was just sort of drawn to it that I started to explore the possibility of organic grape growing. And with that, I made a blended red wine, and just as a trial, because we had a little bit of vineyards at our home ranch that was untainted. We didn't use, back then in those days, we didn't use chemicals that are used today, sort of the modern farming technique. Not that there weren't chemicals used back then, but we didn't use them. And so I was able to do some trials, and eventually we created the brand Bonterra. And Bonterra became, oh gosh, my full expression, if you will. That was it. This was the cat's meow, to use a 1950s term.
And so, how in that era, how did you communicate the relevance and the importance of the fact that it was made from grapes that were being farmed organically? Were you communicating like that this was going to be a good thing because it was good for the earth, or because it was good for the flavors of the wine, or because it was good for the health of the end drinker? What was your pitch to people on it?
Well, I mean, I just tell you, I'll give you two approaches that we did. One was I gathered the growers that not only were we growing grapes, but we also bought grapes from several other farmers in Mendocino County. And so we developed a educational program along with UC Davis. And we got a group of experts in a whole different host, the pest management, soil management, et cetera. And they came and they did little modules, and we created a 3-day program for our growers, because our goal was to enroll them in becoming organic, all of them, which we pretty much succeeded. The other piece was when we were out marketing, because of the uniqueness of the garden that we had, we would travel around the country. We also had an amazing chef, John Ash, who has had his namesake restaurant in Sonoma County, he's no longer there. John was a phenomenal artist and creator and passionate about food and historian of food, but also an amazing chef. And I would travel with him. And as we traveled, our marketing team would organize these little packets that we would send ahead of time to these restaurants. And I can remember being, back in those days, if you did a winemaker dinner or luncheon, there was 100 people in the room. So there were big crowds or more. And what we would do is we would lay out all these little twigs of the organic herbs at that time. You didn't put anything else on, but we would send in the produce, the fresh produce, or we would locally find the produce. And we would speak about it. We would speak about the importance of the marriage of food and wine, but clearly it was organic food and organic wine that we really wanted the message to be.
And so at what point did you discover biodynamics, and what was your thought when you did?
Well, I was fortunate to have this amazing friend, Alan York. Alan was a fellow about my age who ended up living on, well, let me see, I kind of go back a little farther than that. I knew of Alan because of his work in biodynamics. And also he had a farm over in Anderson Valley, which is in Mendocino County. So it's just over the hill from where we were in Ukiah or Hopland. And so Alan and I became great friends, and we explored a lot. We had a lot of conversations that explored a lot, mostly in the conversational realm. And I put on a conference. Oh, well, this is interesting because this connects with you all. And it was a small group somebody from France, somebody from Australia, um, um, 2 or 3 guys from the US, or 3 or 4 guys from the US, along with some educators and compost experts. And the Perrin family actually sent Pierre Perrin. He was at the table with us for 3 days or 4 days, and we explored this. We initially was the idea was going to be about organics, but all we wanted to talk about was biodynamics.
And when was this? What year are we talking here?
2000.
Okay.
About 2000. And I think you guys had started already, hadn't you? Started.
We had, and Pierre was actually here for the full harvest in one of those years, like 98 or 99, something like that. So he had spent some time here at Tablas, but we had started. Our first vintage was 97, so we would have started, but it was still early in our history.
Yeah, so he was fascinated by it, and he was a great contribution. And Alan really led us in that conversation, because Alan was really the great expert in the distinctions, if you will, of biodynamics. What made biodynamic farming, and what were the components, and what should we pay attention to, and what should we explore for our own selves on our own farms. And the great thing he left with me was that the farm was like a living organism in of itself. It was unique, and it had something it wanted to say. But maybe even more importantly is it had its own structural elements, if you will. It has a respiratory system, a circulatory system, a nervous system, a digestive system. And we can go into those if you want. But each property sort of is like an expanded a dive into terroir.
Right.
Yeah. And so there was nobody like Alan. Literally nobody like Alan. There's been anybody like Alan since. And sort of shortly after that time we got together, we started a study group. And in that study group, boy, we engaged in reading a number of different books that primarily Alan recommended, but it was a joint venture really between him and Mike Benzinger. And we would do a deep dive on Rudolf Steiner and others, many others. We would read their writings, and I can tell you many times I would come to the study group having read the chapters were generally pretty short, maybe, I don't know, 8 to 15 pages. And as I would read them, I would, the first pass, I'd read and I'd just say to myself, oh my God, I don't get this at all. This is freaking crazy. And then I'd read the second time, and then something would kind of show up, and I'd kind of go, oh, no, maybe I see something here. And the third time I'd get in there and I'd start to line it out. And the fourth time I'd put it in a notebook. Then I go to the group session, and after about 15 minutes, I thought, shit, I'm not sure that I read the same book these guys read. So it was Alan. Alan was our guide and mentor and guru and all of that. He just had a beautiful way of articulating the values and the approaches and the techniques that would express biodynamics.
I love your analogy of a farm being like a living organism, because I think it helps put into perspective for people what happens when you maybe intervene in one piece of that there's going to be unintended consequences in other areas. And in trying to build soil and build biodiversity and um, build the environment in which the microorganisms that do so much of the work connecting the different pieces of this organism, um, that's going to have real benefits in the health of the overall organism. I love the way that kind of encapsulates the idea.
Well, I'll just use your property as the example, if I can. With your sheep, it's you guys have really mastered the use of grazing animals on the property, and that is the representation of the digestive system, or your way of recognizing that the microbial life in the soil is really the digestive component, if you will, of the soil. And the animals are that amazing contribution that that they provide. You used a way of describing it a little bit earlier than I hadn't heard before. But this idea of having the sheep in there and laying down the manure, that live energy that exists inside of their manure is super contribution to the livelihood of the microbial activity in the soil. That's one of the that's expressed beautifully at Tablas Creek. The other one is this idea of a circulatory system. So in our bodies, it's the blood system, but in a farm, it's water and how water flows. And so with your rolling hills, you can really start to get some sense of the importance of paying attention to how water flows, how rainfall falls, the timing of it, the amount, how it penetrates the soil, how deep it penetrates the soil, and the importance of capturing the moisture. And we, as you and I know, is that the more you increase the organic matter, the more water holding capacity you have in the soil. And you guys have done a beautiful job of increasing your organic matter. I've seen your numbers. So those components, and then if we just talk just a little bit about the respiratory system, where you are, your property on in your county, in California, in the United States, in the world, is unique. It's unique, absolutely unique in of itself, just as you and I are unique on the planet. There's no other one of us, no other Alan York. And so that breathing process that happens on that property, which is airflow. So it's the way the air flows, mostly from the coast, onto the property at the time it does, at the temperature that it does, in the direction that it does, is really important for us to know, and how we lay out our vineyards, and so from a directional standpoint, so we bring good airflow into the vines, but also recognizing that the vineyard breathes out in the morning and in at night, as well as the changes during the changes of the moon. So the barometric pressure changes on each moon cycle, and of course through the seasons. Out in spring and back in fall. So energy is moving back into the soil at this stage of the game. So those things are critical for us to know when engaging with different practices. Whether we're cultivating or seeding or harvesting, all of those components make a big. All of those activities make a big difference when we are aware of them and aware of that cycle. And that comes to you and me or any other farmer, when she's out there observing the needs of the farm. I say listening for the expression of the farm, So what does the farm want to express? What is that personality? How does it want to be expressed? And how can I, as a farmer, engage with the farm such that it gets fully expressed?
Yeah, we're trying to help the farm be its best self.
That's self, yeah, and that's the nervous system of the farm.
Okay, so let me jump forwards a little bit um, to regenerative and specifically regenerative organic. I know when we were approached to be a part of the pilot program in 2018, we had never heard the term before. We didn't know what regenerative farming was. We had to have it explained to us. We did some research, and all of a sudden, a lot of the things that we had been doing anyway kind of clicked into place in a framework that made a lot of sense. I'm wondering what your first experience was with the idea of regenerative farming, and whether you had a similar reaction or whether it was something that that you already knew about, or what was your beginnings with regenerative and then regenerative organic?
Right. Well, at the time, I was chairing Demeter, and as you and I know, most of the people in the audience here know, is that biodynamics is the systems, just as we've been describing. It's all about the systems, being aware of the healthy system. It's a biological approach to farming, not a chemical approach to farming. And the first conversations I explored with regenerative actually go way back to Rodale. So Rodale was the first guy to use the terminology regenerative. And for me personally, I started exploring it maybe 15 years ago. And I didn't really know, really what to make of it, but I explored it from every which way. And I came to and I was using some of the language, if you will, from biodynamics because it fit so well, that it was the possibility of restoring the it's sort of like any kind of process that restores the viability and the health of the farm itself,
Right.
whether it's beneath the soil or above the soil. And that was my simple phrase to kind of hold it. And at that time, there was those who were talking about regenerative, and they were talking about it strictly from the standpoint of climate change and carbon sequestration. And for me, it was hard for me to kind of accept that regenerative was only fell into that box, because I felt like you missed the point.
Right.
You missed the point. And so the deeper point is that our farms are part of this larger system, and they have an important contribution to this larger system. And we need to recognize that. And we need to recognize that what we do or don't do has an impact on the system. And part of that was absolutely sequestering carbon, calcium, in order to create this water holding capacity or into the soil. But there was all these other elements.
Right.
And so when I heard about this idea, which was actually created by Rose Macario, who is the CEO of Patagonia, David Bronner, who is the chief, I don't know what officer, he's a chief cosmic officer at Bronner's, I think that's his title, and Rodale, who had this research orientation to farming, an ongoing research program that's been in existence for a number of years. They decided that they were going to create this alliance, and the alliance was designed to bring in organizations in these three different categories: social fairness, animal welfare, and soil health. And so they had identified different organizations, and one of them was, they decided that sort of that organization inside of the farming side that was doing it really well was Demeter. And so they contacted us. At that time, Jim Fulmer, who was working with us as a co-executive director, stepped onto the board. And then about a year later, I joined the board instead of Jim. And that's when I found Elizabeth. That's my claim to fame. I found Elizabeth Whitlow, who had a great background for it, and as being the leader that we needed to do in order to create this amazing startup. And so the rest of it was building out the components and the elements, the standards in each of those three legs of the stool. That took some time. And I'd say that, in any startup, it's the idea, the people, and timing. And the timing was really right. For me, I recognized that biodynamics didn't really speak to everybody. And it didn't speak to a large enough audience. It was about, 3% of all organic or something like that, and
Right.
Organic is 3 or 4 or 5% of all farming. So it was pretty small, get down to a tenth of, a hundredth of 1%, something like that. And this idea of combining this idea of organic along with regenerative expanded one's view in the possibility of what farming could be.
And one of the things that I think it really sets it aside from the systems that were there before, including biodynamics, including organics, is that it's kind of consciously focused on the externalities of the choices that you make as a farm. So, yes, you're making these decisions based on the health of your soil and the health of your crops, but regenerative organics, it sort of requires you to be thinking about the impacts and not just thinking about the impacts, but making sure that your choices have a positive impact on not just your own farm, but on your neighbors, on your community, on the broader environment, people who make up your organization and your community. And I think that's kind of a really significant and meaningful and worthwhile forward step. And it's one of the things that's been really inspiring for us.
Right. I agree. I have a little short story there. So my aha, as I started to explore this pathway, this journey, if you will, came in the early 80s. And I call it my Sauvignon Blanc story. And I can remember being, as a young winemaker, being out in the field in sort of late August, early September, tasting fruit. And I can remember tasting the fruit on one vine, and was had all of the fruit flavors I'd expect, all of the fig and apple flavors I'd expect for Sauvignon Blanc. And then just walking 10 feet over, it was a head trained vineyard, and tasting the fruit off another vine, and it was flat and insipid. I didn't understand that. I didn't get it. I had always had great hopes for that wine. In those first few years of making that wine, I would end up having to put it into my everyday table wine. And 3 years after I converted it to organic, it started to go into our top level Sauvignon Blanc, our estate Sauvignon Blanc. So that really, opened my eyes up to this realization that one was that the chemicals I was using that were landing on the soil were killing some of the microbiological life in the soil. And some vines could handle it better than others, and others not. And and I saw that, geez, if I eliminated those chemicals, I could enliven the entire block and make better wine. And at the same time, I also realized that my vineyard wasn't isolated, it wasn't alone, it wasn't separate, in the sense that those chemicals I was using were probably flowing downstream into somebody else's pumps that were being pumping out of the river or pumping out of the stream and going into their property. So I really shifted my whole orientation to how I chose to run my business and ultimately how I ran our vineyards.
That fits so neatly with the story that the Perrins tell, where Jacques Perrin made the decision in the 1950s to stop using chemicals. He had only used them for about a decade in the after World War II, when every French farming association was basically saying, this is the future. Like, this is how you produce more. This is how you produce more reliably. This is how you avoid bad years. You use this product for this and that product for that and that product for that. And he just grew like disillusioned with that and felt like this wasn't the way that he'd learned to farm from his father. And he would go back to not using any chemicals, and was blown away with how much more the wine that he made, even that first year, tasted to him like Beaucastel, tasted like that place than what he'd been making.
Yeah.
For them, it was kind of their aha moment. And it sounds really similar, that these choices we think of as being choices of convenience, or choices of kind of ethics or your model. But in many cases, the choices that we're making to farm organically, or then to farm biodynamically or regeneratively, like, these are going to make wines that are more expressive, have more character of place, have more character of varietal, and are going to be things that really get you closer to that elusive idea of terroir.
Yes.
And it's like, that's one of the things I think sometimes people maybe don't get out in the broader world, which is, like, we're not making these choices like and having to balance, do I do it this way, which is going to be better for the wine, or do it this way, which is going to be better for the planet. Like, these choices that we're making for that have positive impacts on our soils, our planet, our people, are also having positive impacts on the grapes and the wine that they make.
Yeah. That's perfect. That's exactly it. It makes it easy. It makes it easy when you discover that it's just that simple. Is that, chemicals don't work. They don't work in the sense that it doesn't work for those that are really committed to the expression of their place. Really, that went to a great deal of effort to identify where they wanted to grow grapes and identify where they wanted to make wine, and because they thought that there was something special that came out of that particular place. You and I have been on this journey for some time together, and we discovered that. We discovered that at that early phase, which has allowed us to explore deeper and deeper, and finding, I oftentimes think about how the language of agriculture is this language of, it's a reductive language, in the sense it's, reducing things down to individual small elements and then pulling them apart and then sticking something in there that, we think is going to actually make a difference. But it's chemical based. So the answers are all found inside of chemistry. And that language is so ingrained in farming today that it's hard to get a farmer to see that there's another possibility. But when they see it, when they get a little glimpse of it, that they could actually, grapes are reasonably easy to farm, so they don't have as many chemical pressures, or insect or
Right.
weed pressures. Although it's getting harder with climate change, I have to admit that we can do it. We can do it, and once that's found, we I say we at the Regenerative Organic Alliance have this opportunity to recreate the narrative on what agriculture can be, to generate a new language that allows for farmers to join and explore in a new paradigm, in the paradigm of farming, I say in service of life, not increasing productivity and volume, which really doesn't have anything to do with quality, but in service of the life expression of the property, which is found in the life expression inside of the soil, the microbes, or the animals, or our farming teams out there. Those are the components that truly get at the cultural expression that we want to have, that we've invested our lives in.
Yep. Well, I could literally sit here and talk to you all afternoon. It would be a pleasure, but we've already gone over the half hour that I try to keep these to. So we'll have to promise to get together and dive into this more in person later. But meanwhile, if people want to learn more about what you're working on now at Truett-Hurst or with the Regenerative Organic Alliance or anywhere else, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, one is, truetthurst.com. So, we've got a beautiful website that really describes the work that we're doing in the area of biodynamics on the farm. Ours is that one is a much smaller farm there, but it's a small version of yours, a tiny version of yours. And then we have a larger version of our own family farm up in Mendocino County, which we don't have a website for. And then the Regenerative Organic Alliance is really, it goes into a much deeper dive on the importance of these three components, these three legs of the stool that make up for what we believe is important in agriculture today.
Lovely. Okay, well, thank you again, anybody who joined. This has been my conversation with Paul Dolan, who is one of my inspirations and icons. And thank you, Paul, for taking a piece out of your afternoon to talk.
Hey, thanks, buddy. Great to see you. Great to see you all.
See you too. Okay, everybody. I'll see you all in 2 weeks. Same time in 2 weeks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.